So I have complained, I think is an appropriate word, on this show before. In fact, just earlier this week or maybe late last week, about how you can be as loony fringe lefty as you want in the city of Seattle and in Washington state, and you're normalized, you're mainstreamed. You know, you can be part of the events and activities and sporting events and blah, 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 all these things. And it's not a big deal. But even if you're moderate or like slightly right of center, you're treated like an outcast. Like, people won't associate with you. You can't be like part of mainstream events and things because, oh my gosh, is that a Trump MAGA Republican? And personally speaking, I think this angers me because it's happened to me, right? So I got a little bit of angst about it. Not that I need to be mainstreamed or hang out with all those weirdos, but a perfect example of this I always use, and it speaks to just the rotten core of Seattle politics and how the spectrum of politics is so shifted, right? It's like moderates to them is like a liberal, and that's not even, they call them conservatives. It's like a progressive is a moderate, right? In Seattle. And it's like, if you're a socialist, oh, you're kind of on the left, and a progressive is a moderate, and then like a liberal's on the right. And then everything right of that is just, oh, cuckoo righties. And I use the example of a few years ago, right when I was quitting my job at Fox 13, there was, I don't know if it was Seattle Met or one of those magazines did like a list of the top 5 most influential thinkers in Seattle. And I made the list and I thought, well, that's real nice. They think of me as one of the top 5 most influential thinkers in Seattle. And then I read the little write-up on me, and it was like, I was the only like conservative, you know, in there. So I was probably just the token conservative. But then it was like this negative write-up. Like, oh, I'm an influential thinker, but I'm a loose cannon. You know? And then also on that list was that police abolitionist lady. Who's the one that moved to Detroit? Nikita Oliver. Oh, sorry, they, them. Yeah. Nikita Oliver, who like ruined Seattle before moving to Detroit, was a far left socialist police abolitionist, you know, run for city council and mayor unsuccessfully. And it was this just like glowing write up on why she's one of the most influential thinkers in Seattle. And that's the moment I realized is like, their sense of what's normal and not and what's acceptable and not is so skewed. And so, yeah, you could be as far fringe lefty as you want. You could be a socialist, police abolitionist. You're absolutely welcome in the club, but God forbid you're moderate, have a little ounce of independent thought, or Republican. Then it's like, well, you're not welcome. Like, you just, and we experienced this. We've had people, we talked about Andrea Suarez, who is now running for state house, but pre-primary, we were like banished from speaking to her essentially because, oh, that would be really bad for Andrea if she was associated with you. It's like, would it be? I don't get that. And she's now like, put that out and said, no, it's cool. But so just an example to get into this story. So the Seattle Reign FC, the women's soccer club in Seattle, does something called honors its legends. So they tweeted this out: meet our Starbucks Seattle Reign FC legend, Judge Veronica Galvan, King County Superior Court judge. Interesting. So what is a legend? What's the let's see here. Yeah. So it's sponsored by Starbucks, the Legends Campaign, celebrating extraordinary female leaders in the Pacific Northwest. At each home game, home match, my apologies to the soccer fans. Seattle Reign and Starbucks will honor one woman as a legend in recognition of her extraordinary contributions to our community and beyond. All right. What are the extraordinary contributions of King County Superior Court Judge Veronica Galvan? Well, her extraordinary contributions are many because she's been in the news many, many times going back at least 5 years. And by extraordinary contributions, I mean horrific contributions to the erosion of public safety in Seattle and King County. Let's just go through a couple of the headlines, shall we? Judge releases 12-year-old accused of using ghost gun in Seattle carjacking. Yep, sent him home on electronic home monitoring. Teens arrested with modified guns at Chinatown Seafair Parade released to home monitoring, which we said at the time, if these had been some little white supremacists or something there to ruin a Chinatown parade, they'd probably still be behind bars awaiting trial. But nope, teens arrested with modified guns released to home monitoring. Let's see. Attacker who fractured El Corazon singer's skull out of jail. Yeah, almost kill someone randomly for no reason with a bat. Well, King County Superior Court Judge Veronica Galvan will release you after 10 days behind bars with no bail. You just have to promise to take part in an enhanced community center for alternative programs and do some drug treatment. Yeah, no big deal there. In fact, our friend Dory Monson in 2019, he was really the first one to raise a red flag about this exact judge, now being honored by the Seattle Reign FC. He did an extensive story in 2019 about Judge Veronica Galvan, and he wrote this: "We have a very active socialist Marxist political structure around here. Their stated desire is to dismantle the structures of governance and order so they can rebuild it all in their image. How do you do that? You do it with crime. You do it with drugs. You let criminals take over the streets. We have the second worst property crime of any major city in the country. We have probably the worst drug crisis of any city in the country. We may as well have legalized drugs, seeing how we allow drug use all over and how we don't prosecute people for possessing small amounts of hard drugs. When you do those things, you weaken a region and you get closer to the stated goal of destroying it. It's a bizarre fantasy, but it's so much more closer to reality than anyone wants to admit or acknowledge. They want to see our systems torn down so they can put it in their twisted vision of what law enforcement should be." All of that our friend Dory wrote in 2019 about Judge Veronica Galvan and what she represents, which is the erosion of the rule of law, which is the absolute erosion of justice and our justice system and what that really means for the victims of crimes. And this judge is absolutely an activist in a robe. She, I don't think, hides from that. There's a Facebook post that she put out on her personal Facebook. "What does resistance look like when you wear a black robe? I recognize that the institution I work for never expected me to occupy this space, but I shall occupy it by acknowledging my privilege and recognizing the institution I love has been complicit in perpetuating oppression. I shall continue to educate, to learn, and to speak my truth as both a judge and a woman of color, as these identities are not mutually exclusive. I am grateful to be surrounded by colleagues who support me in this endeavor, ensuring our practices conform to our principles." And her principles are soft on crime, even at the expense of the safety of community members. Now, again, one of our eagle-eyed viewers, Daniel, who is bird dog in this story, found this podcast that just a couple months ago, Judge Galvan appeared on with Enrique Cerna, who's like a longtime Latino reporter in Washington State, sort of focuses on those issues. And the podcast, and again, this is just a few months ago. So he had her on his show to talk to her, despite all of these. And I think because of all the controversy around these decisions she's made, where teens or young adults go out, commit very, very heinous, violent acts, and they go to her court and they're given a little slap on the wrist and, "Oh, go home to mommy and daddy," because I'm sure that's a wonderful environment if you're bringing a ghost gun to a parade or if you're beating a man at random with a baseball bat, right? So she talked a little bit about the juvenile crime crisis and about, what's going on in her mind when she makes these decisions. And specifically, this first clip I want to play you is about teens who are committing crimes with guns and her assertion that, well, it's not really their fault, it's our fault. Here it is.
None of the systems, none of us have clean hands within this context, because these children are accessing these weapons from adults. They're not going into stores and buying them. No. From adults who may not be responsible and have them locked up or have them safely to the side. I mean, we see grown people, get upset that somebody cut them off in a vehicle and start shooting. Grown people. And yet we have a higher standard and expectation for a 12-year-old. It's like putting a 2-year-old behind the wheel of a car and expecting that they're not going to hit anything. We have to take responsibility somewhat that we have created an environment in which these weapons are glorified. They are considered something of a thing to have, to be cool or whatever. But this is on us as well. These children did not come into this world, with a machine gun in their hand.
Yeah, and people didn't come into this world with a bullet in their head. People weren't born into this world with a fractured skull from a baseball bat. What's your point? And she says all of us need to take I'm not taking responsibility for Jack. I don't take responsibility for that. The vast majority of the state has nothing to do with kids, young adults who illegally obtain firearms and go out and gangbang and shoot people and beat people. So no, I'm not complicit in that. My viewers and listeners aren't complicit in that. Nicole's not complicit in that. I'm not taking responsibility for that. Don't put that on us. There are a lot of other, it's not like, I mean, she wants to act like, oh, there's a gun in a home, and so automatically a kid's going to go grab it and they're going to go out and gangbang and use it to rob people, to carjack, to shoot fellow gang members. Like, no, there's a lot of steps between gun being in the home, kid picking it up to commit a crime. And so she wants to make this a community problem, right? Well, it's like, well, what about the people who are hurt, the people who are killed? And, you know, there's never an acknowledgement when it comes to this of who the victims typically are when a youth, you know, these youth that are coming into her courtroom go out and commit crimes. Oftentimes they're other youth. What about those kids? What about those kids who aren't picking up guns, who aren't gangbanging, who aren't hurting anyone? And then they get hurt by a youth who is. So her singular focus really seems to be in this entire conversation on coddling criminals because society has done something wrong to them. And I'm not saying there's no societal responsibility to try to do something to prevent youth from getting into a criminal life. And she talks a little bit about that too. I just want to play this. I got 2 other short clips I want to play for you. Here's one.
Let's make sure we continue to fund community groups that provide programming to these youth, mentorship to these youth.
Yeah, community programs like the one that was just in the news that did just that, but it turned out it was just one big drug trafficking ring, and the lady who was in charge with it was like trafficking deadly drugs into our communities. Yeah, I'm all for community programs that go to help youth, but maybe we should have a little more oversight of those community programs because there's been an awful lot of them where people involved in them have either been stealing money, wasting money, no results, or in this case, like federal drug trafficking charges. All right, one last clip from this conversation that this judge had on Enrique Cernet's podcast.
Give them a reason to look in a different direction other than the one that they've been going down.
I agree. You know what a reason would be to look in a different direction other than the path they've been going down? Consequences. Accountability. As a judge, that's part of your job. Now, I'm all for, and as a society, it benefits us to prevent crime before it happens, and to do that by making sure that people have economic opportunity, that they do have, you know, a good quality education. Man, we could have a long conversation about that right now, right? Because in Washington State, we know that our kids in public schools are not getting a good quality education. They're getting a free pass. Oh, no child can fail. We're going to send you out into the world. You never got a good quality education. We're going to expect you to succeed and not take a different path in life, even though we have set you up to fail in the name of like woke ideology. So we could have an entirely different conversation about our education system run by Democrats. But I agree, like we need to make sure that there's intervention very early on before a kid goes out, picks up a baseball bat and smashes in a singer's skull, before a kid prints a ghost gun, goes to a parade with it to shoot a rival gang member or whatever it is, before someone uses a gun to commit like their 14th carjacking of the month. I agree, but at the point when they do that, at the point, and we call them kids, but these are teens, in some cases young adults who are committing very adult crimes. At the point when they do that and they're in your court in front of you, you have an obligation as a pivotal part of the justice system to make sure that they're held accountable in a way that will, can you play that last clip again?
Give them a reason to look in a different direction other than the one that they've been going down.
In a way that will give them a reason to look in a different direction other than the one they've been going down. And I'll tell you what, sending them back home to their house on electronic home monitoring, that's not giving them a reason to go in a different direction other than the one they've been going down. There's the example of I think about this clip often, the teenager who's in court and he doesn't get electronic home monitoring after committing, I think it was a drive-by shooting, and he's like shocked by it because he brings up another one of his friends who did get electronic home monitoring, another fellow gang member. And so what did it teach him? Well, it taught him, well, my friend got electronic home monitoring after he committed a crime with a gun, so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to get electronic home monitoring. Then he got a judge who wouldn't give it to him, and he was shocked by it. So here you have this judge who, by any reasonable measure, is a fringe activist who is actively making our communities more dangerous. And what does the Seattle Reign name her? What is it? A legend. and Starbucks, sponsored by Starbucks, totally normalized, totally mainstream behavior, trotting her out there at a home game, celebrating her as a Seattle Reign FC legend, an extraordinary female leader in the Pacific Northwest. Do you think for 1 second that they've ever honored a Republican woman as an extraordinary female leader? Or even a moderate? Like, show me a moderate that's been honored as an extraordinary female leader. Show me someone who's pro-police, who's pro-law enforcement, who's been honored by Seattle Reign as an extraordinary female leader in the Pacific Northwest. And these are nominations, by the way. You think if we flooded them with nominations that I'm an extraordinary female leader in the Pacific Northwest, you'd even get a response? And by the way, please don't do that, because I would reject it. I absolutely do not want to be honored by Seattle Reign FC in any way, shape, or form. But this just, again, it's a larger picture. It's not just me complaining that, like, you know, we're vilified and we're outcasts and all these things because we have like reason and common sense. Because when that's the crowd that's vilifying you and labeling you an outcast, that's actually a compliment and an accomplishment. But that just shows you on the spectrum how messed up and screwed up the spectrum of politics is in Washington State and why we are the way we are. Is everything is skewed so far to the left where they normalize people like this and behavior like this, when instead she should be scrutinized, she should be criticized, and she probably shouldn't have a job. And she, you know, I know there's stuff that shields judges from lawsuits and all of that. But I mean, this is something where you have families who are devastated by the decisions that she's made in that courtroom. And now she's being honored. She's a legend. Yeah, she's legendary, but not for good reasons. And I mean, this whole, you know, normalizing, you know, and it bothers me when sporting teams take like blatantly political positions just because like sports is supposed to be this thing where it's like everybody can enjoy it, right? And I'm not saying that Seattle Reign FC thing is a blatantly political position. I don't know if you would think that they know by just a Google or do something to know, but they don't see her decisions as bad. So that's the issue there. They don't see those decisions as bad. They see them as like, she is fighting for justice, right? So then the Seattle Storm comes out. Literally a tweet from the Seattle Storm account. Was that this morning? Oh, God. Not a surprise, but still. I mean, what a big middle finger to anyone who enjoys watching the Seattle Storm who isn't a Democrat. Here at the Storm, we are advocates for equality and opportunity. We need leaders who fight for all of us all the time. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz align strongly with our mission and values, and we proudly endorse this presidential team. Make your voting plan at vote.org. Seattle Storm for Harris Walz. Like, again, I mean, a Seattle sporting team would never be allowed. It would never be acceptable to endorse a moderate or even a Republican, ever. And so you just become outcasts. And I guarantee, yeah, I'm sure that a lot of the Seattle Storm fan base are voting for Harris Walz. I think people who are paying money to go watch women play basketball are, does that mean, sorry, it's just really boring, are voting for Harris Walz. So why do you always look at me like I said something that's incredibly offensive?
I didn't even look up. I just smiled.
Am I wrong though?
No, you're not wrong.
Of course I'm not wrong.
But their goal is to attract more. So
right, nobody's gonna, because you're just defending them, right? So
and
yeah, it's.
And I think you've talked about this before, but even going to a Kraken game and it's all politics.
Right.
It's like pride and trans and blah, blah, blah. Oh, they have all these special days and you're polarizing.
You're polarizing people. You're making people outcasts. And
it's
like,
supposed
again,
to be an escape.
It's supposed to be an escape. Yeah, the Kraken game I went to where it was like everything was pride and there was like pride stuff in intermission. And it's like, okay, like I support gay people, but also can I just watch hockey? Like, can I just watch hockey and you not alienate? But yeah, fringe loony lefty, very, very good. Anything left or right of center, anything right of liberal, evil, bad, horrible, we won't let you sit with us, essentially.